OnStage Colorado Podcast. I'm Alex Willett, here once again with arts reporter Toni Tresca. Hey, Toni.
Howdy, Alex. It is awesome to be here with you and a special guest host this week.
Yeah.
We've got Kevin Douglas, who is 2 Cent Lions Executive Marketing and Education Director, who just opened the Rocky Horror Show at the People's Building in Aurora. How's it going, Kevin?
Hey, I'm well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you here. Can I just ask real quick, how did opening weekend go?
It was fabulous. The energy on opening night, and Alex, you were there. It was biggest crowd we've ever performed to is 110 people, and we're hoping that kind of spark will spread the word of mouth. And I think that Rocky is such a crowd pleaser anyway, and doing some Midnight Madness, some non-Midnight Madness is encouraging people to come again, bring a crowd for the audience interaction next weekend. So I think that it'll be even more crazy energy once we get to those interactive shows.
We're gonna touch on that a little bit more in a little bit, but first, just as usual, we're gonna unpack some of the shows we've seen and discuss whether you should check them out. And then later in the episode, we'll do our Colorado Headliners, which is our weekly top 10 roundup of shows that look good. And then an interview that I did with Max Shulman. We've been teasing this for a while because it just worked out that I recorded it a while ago and we haven't been able to get it on. So he's a professor at the University of Colorado Springs, who's adapted a trio of Shakespeare plays about the Henrys into one show. So that'll be Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V. It's really a fun conversation. So you finally get to hear it in this episode.
Yeah, that sounds great. So be sure to stick around for that discussion a little bit later in the podcast. Now, on to our weekly roundup of what we've seen around the state. Alex, what have you seen recently?
Well, I've been pretty busy out there as you have. So I saw The Pillow Man last Thursday, maybe. That was a Miscreant Theater Collective thing, which is played by Martin McDonough, which we've talked about some. I thought it was a really good production. In this really weird space called the Creepatorium, Coma Street. And really terrifying, really horrible stories in this show that's written by this short story writer who gets hauled in because the stories that he's written that involve harming children start to come true in the city. They did a greir job with it, and really interesting experience. And then, of course, we were at Hamlet at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. This is their opener for the year. And I don't know, you were a little tepid on it. I thought it was a pretty good production.
I thought it was a pretty technically good production. I thought that the Viking kind of aesthetic, particularly through the costume design of the piece, was really, really impressive and well done. I just thought that quite a bit of the performances fell a little bit flat for me, and the pacing was a little bit off, particularly since it's a story that we know pretty well. I thought that it kind of drug in a little in places and took a while to really get into the action of the piece. They also took an intermission at a strange place. They did it before the players do the murder of Gonzago, which I think is an interesting place, because it kind of dulls the momentum of the first act and makes it really un-actiony. But I thought there were some really good moments. I mentioned the technical design was all really good. But yeah, so I was a little bit more mixed on it.
Okay. Well, there was a sort of a galaxy of stars there on opening night. There was a lot of people from the theater community there that we saw. It was a lot of fun seeing everybody.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to the DU Backstage, the student drama ensemble at University of Denver, my alma mater. They went to Hamlet the night before Rocky, and I think that's the funniest double feature back-to-back I've ever heard. And they said it was a very jarring weekend for them. But
yeah, we did the same thing. And it was definitely from the big, slick, massive production to not to say that your production wasn't well done, but it certainly wasn't on the level of Hamlet at the Denver Center. So, and then Toni and I drove up to Fort Collins yesterday and saw The School for Lies at Bob Blue. This is a really, really wacky show. It's written all in rhyming couplets, and it's based on Moliere's The Misanthrope. And Toni, what was your you had some interesting takes on it, especially just a lot of the design, the costumes and things like that.
This was another really strong technical production. The costumes in particular, like you just highlighted, used a lot of really interesting, vibrant colors, particularly with the three clown characters in the play who are kind of the suitors, in the situation. And I just thought it was really inventive. It was a very lively piece. It's one act, no intermission, and about 90 minutes long. It was pretty well paced. And it tells the story of the misanthrope very loosely, I would say. It kind of keeps the central idea that there is a character at the core who is fed up with the rituals of society and doesn't want to play along with the conventions and rules. But it does it in a really interesting, kind of more contemporary way. So I actually had a lot of fun with it. I didn't know what to expect. I had seen another version of The Misanthrope earlier this year that was set in a contemporary setting at the Theater Company of Lafayette, and that production left some stuff to be desired. I thought the idea was interesting, but it wasn't totally fleshed out. So it was interesting to see another version of The Misanthrope in the same year in a very different way.
Yeah, very different version. And very funny. At first, all those rhyming couplets are a little overwhelming. It was almost like watching a Shakespeare show. It takes you a little while to get used to the language. But after it settled in, I was like, it was really well done. There were places where one character would start it and another would finish the rhyming couplet. And it was a lot of fun. And then the other one we saw, of course, Kevin, you're familiar with this one. It's the Rocky Horror Show. This is the original stage musical that the film was based on at the People's Building in Aurora from 2 Cent Lion. And and Toni, you haven't seen this one yet. I was there on opening night. Great show, great crowd. Oh my God, it was a lot of friends and family. There were a lot of bouquets in the audience, I noticed. But yeah, really, really raucous crowd. A lot of people dressed up in Kevin, including you, where you were wearing the kind of like there's a photo I took of you and Izzy where you're wearing your black dress and stuff.
Yeah.
So what was
Well, I was very grateful to Izzy, one of the co-founders at 2 Cent Lion. They brought a spare lingerie dress. I was originally just wearing jeans and a V-neck, and they provided the dress. So I was wearing the dress and jeans, and then their friend coming from their apartment brought the skirt, and it really brought the whole look together. Felt wrong to be dressed like that on opening. But
so it's a team effort to get you dressed, Kevin.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it was amazing. I also do the front of house for 2 Cent, and I came up with a really fun Rocky themed cocktail menu. So, all the drinks at the bar there was Janet's Jack and Coke, which is the most popular, but Rocky's red wine, Frankenfurter's cocktails. You can see where this is going. So
Right.
that was fun. People were really engaging, and we also had a photo booth with Elusive Ingredients fake car, which has the license plate Asshole 1, which if you're familiar with the call and response, it's Brad's car. So, of course, it's the Asshole car.
right?
And it's an actual set piece in the show. So that's out in the lobby for people to take pictures. And they were having a fun time with that.
Fun part that I was mentioning this to Toni yesterday. So the guy that played Brad, Sam Evans, so he has a line in one of his songs where he's saying, "Help me, mommy," and he was looking right at his mom when he sang it, because I know his parents, because his mom used to be my son's Taekwondo instructor, which is kind of a weird connection.
Such a small world.
What a small world.
Yeah, that was really a really funny part. So yeah, I thought it was a great show. I thought your projections were really well, and man, they were synced really well too, because that's not easy. How long did it take you to get that all fixed or working?
Oh, it was a task. It was definitely a task, especially the opening song, because the tempo of the movie version is what I edited to. We opened the show, for context, with clips from the science fiction movies being referenced.
I love that. Yeah.
I just learned was Richard O'Brien's original plan for the movie, but they decided to go with the red lips instead. It would be simpler, and it's also so much more iconic in a way.
Right.
But we were happy to use that motif because there's so many great references with those old movies. Our director really leaned into that for the entire metaphor for the show. Monster movie, but a drag queen is the monster. And the opening number, I had to really work with the music director to figure out what the tempo was going to be. There wasn't singing about watching tarantula taking to the hills.
Right.
Very little things that other people probably wouldn't care about, but was driving me crazy when we were in tech. Who performed as Usher at Magenta. She's performed all around Denver. She even performed at the Henrys during the In Memoriam. And her voice just gives chills. It's breathtaking. And that combined with this montage paying homage to these old classics, I thought that it was a really beautiful way to kick off the show. I sent a video to my dad during tech, and he replied in all caps. He was like, "I just got chills." And it was cool. It was cool to see the audience really engage with that, especially because young people often don't see those movies. I'm hoping people will be inspired to go. A lot of them are free on YouTube. Like just Vincent Price movies. You can just search old B horror sci-fi movies and watch them in full.
Yeah, I will say, it was a great opening night. I really wanted Frankenfurter, the actor playing him, to be bigger. And the same with Riff Raff, and I think a lot of people are used to having seen the movie. There's no way you can't compare them. And I just wanted them to be a little bit bigger. But other than that, I thought it was really.
Yeah. Our actors definitely took a. Sorry. They definitely took a. It's interesting. We got some advice actually from Betty Hart when we were early stages of rehearsal, and it was about the level of camp that the actors lean into versus the amount of camp that's just present in the text, and how genuine you perform it versus how big you lean into that shtick. And I think that I agree with you in some moments. The Tim Curry and Richard O'Brien performances in the movie are so iconic and so big. But I do love how genuine and earnest Gabe, who is our Frank, when you get to that "I'm Going Home" in that ballad, it really, I thought, was a beautiful culmination of this weirdly genuine Frankenfurter performance.
Yeah, that was. He really hit it on that one. Anything in the mailbag this week?
We don't have any new reviews or anything, but we did get a few positive comments on social media about your recent TikToks about the Pillow Man and Run for Your Life. So people are checking those out, and they seem to be enjoying them. That format, it seems like.
Yeah, it's funny. We had quite a number of views. The last two I posted, I don't know if I did something different, but they haven't gotten as many. But I'm training myself to do TikTok, and there's a lot of ways to do it. You can do it on TikTok. A lot of people just do it on the phone, on the app, and I just can't do that. I've got to have more room, like on a desktop. So I've been actually using Canva and just doing it on there because there's a lot more. I'm just used to Canva, so that's the way I've been doing it. But what about you, Kevin? Are you guys using TikTok at all for 2 cents?
Yeah, actually, one of our actors took a fun TikTok with the cast of Rocky that they sent to me. We're gonna post that in the next couple of days. We lean. I mean, I use everything. I use Canva for everything.
Yeah,
and TikTok, I try to post maybe once a week just to, share the reels we're already sharing on Instagram to try to reach new people. But TikTok is interesting. It'll shadow ban you for really weird reasons. Maybe not weird reasons, but for Rocky, our Rocky is in a gold semi-nude bodysuit, but everything's covered up. He's shirtless, but for whatever reason, that was enough for TikTok to hide one of the ads I made from only 14 people got to see it, which I thought was a shame.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, well, I will say that just going back to your production of Rocky Horror again, there's the shadow scene where Frank and is seducing Brad and Janet. It's pretty risque. There's actually a dildo like thing there that and some simulated fellatio, and it was a little shocking, I must say.
Yeah, I was talking to our set designer about that, where so many live productions, because the movie, it's pretty realistic when he's seducing them in the bedroom.
Yeah.
So many live productions go so far the other direction. It's unrealistic. It's absurd. The dildo is giant. But we were right kind of walking the tightrope where it's just absurd enough to be hilarious, but almost realistic enough.
Yeah.
I got to give credit to our intimacy director and our director, who they collaborated in a way that made it really unique. That, yeah, especially once you see them catching each other in the act on the surveillance screen. Using the projections for that was a quite interesting experience.
I bet. Yeah.
To our main topic for the week, Alex, what are we talking about?
The Rocky Horror Show. So it's kind of interesting. We were just talking a lot about it, but we wanted to talk about the Rocky Horror Show because it just celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2023, and it's just this cultural juggernaut that just won't stop. It's continued unabated all over the place, and a couple of different versions. So I think if we time traveled forward to like 23, 24, it'd still be going strong alongside Shakespeare's plays.
I learned a fun fact. It's the longest running theatrical release in cinematic history because it's consistently played every month around the U.S.
Wow. No
surprise.
The
1975 film, it hits, because so many films they come back or they'll be re-released in cinemas, but Rocky Horror has always just been continuously running throughout the world, which is pretty remarkable. But we're not largely going to be talking about the film version here. That was the Rocky Horror Picture Show, as we just mentioned, came out in 1975. We're going to be talking about Richard O'Brien's original stage musical from 1973. And O'Brien, of course, pretty famously played Riff Raff in the film version. And I mean, his physicality in that is just so seminal to the character. It's so freaky. He's such a little goblet guy. It's a lot of fun.
He had this great malevolent energy. It's super creepy. So yeah, this and Rocky Horror adjacent shows, a lot of the shadow cast. They often pop up at this time of year because it's got that horror aspect, along with a great deal of humor, camp, great songs, and a lot of audience participation. But as you were saying, Kevin, it runs year round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every month the Esquire, before it sadly passed away was that July this year, they hosted the shadow cast, and I know a lot of folks acting in the shadow cast. One of them is actually our lighting designer, and he consistently plays Brad. But the shadow cast is a huge community in Denver. Denver has one of the top 5 longest running in the U.S. I think Seattle technically has the oldest, the Sonic Transducers. But Denver's shadow cast, it's like a community of 50 plus people. They all do it for volunteer, and they just lip sync to the movie and perform and dance. And it's amazing how much performance has come out of it, even when you're not doing the live show. But of course, around Halloween, there's always a couple productions. I know Stage Door and Denver Improv Theater are opening in a couple weeks here.
Bit about Rocky last week on the show when we were talking a little bit about role in the immersive theater community, because it was an early interaction example of that kind of stage interaction where you're doing the call outs, you're really involved, the audience is as much a character as the people who are actually performing. And this was particularly interesting too because of the idea of kind of bringing props to the show was also pretty unique. Props that you could use to interact and engage with, which are you doing a little bit of that with your production, Kevin?
Yeah, we're partnering with Elusive and using their model for props, which is we're selling prop bags at the venue. Unfortunately, the times have changed, and throwing rice in a theater where you're also worried about rodent issues or insect issues, it's not as throwing rice, throwing toast, it's a little more frowned upon nowadays. But we're still going to have the newspapers, the glow sticks, some other gag gifts inside, the cards, the gloves, all the things that will still keep the audience really part of the show.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's been part of, kind of my cultural knowledge for so long. It came out when I was probably around 11 or 12. And I was a kid on Long Island, and everybody, all the cool kids were walking around the halls listening to the soundtrack over and over. And, this was pre-boombox. There were these lame little cassette decks that were awful for listening to music, but the kids were transfixed, and the parents, I think, were pretty horrified.
The musical and the film version are both pretty transgressive, particularly for the time period. I have to imagine that was the first time for a lot of Americans and people around the world that they first heard the term transsexual or transvestite portrayed in a pretty positive way as well. I mean, yeah. Tim Curry did a lot to kind of bring that into at least the cultural zeitgeist in a pretty positive way, I would say. And that didn't have to be the case necessarily at the time. It's a pretty radical portrayal.
The thing a lot of our cast members have talked about was their own queer awakenings in relation to the movie and the way the characters are represented, and just the way gender is toyed with. I forget if this was... No, I was listening to a podcast from the Sonic Transducers, but one of the hosts was talking about how they were in the closet until they saw Tim Curry in that performance, and they said, wait a second, should I be attracted to this? Should I be into this? And that's sort of the awakening for so many people.
Yeah. I think that also in a weird way, so this, back in the 70s, we had there was a lot of anti-gay stuff. Anita Bryant was this famous, homophobe who was making a lot of noise. And I almost think that because it wasn't necessarily gay, it was transvestite, transsexual, it flew under the radar just a little bit for some people that didn't really know what to make of it. So it was a little bit different just from that perspective. But it continues, and like you mentioned, so you guys are doing a stage door on Conifer, Denver Improv, Durango Arts Center is doing the show, and then there's a couple of shadow casts. Parker Arts is doing one. And then Colorado's Elusive Ingredient. So you guys are partnering with them on your midnight shows, right? And are they doing another production too?
Yeah, they run all of October. So we're promoting their October shows. Since there's only one overlap, we're going to have October 4th. We're taking the night off and they're going to be performing. I forget if that's their Paramount show or if that's a different night. But it'll actually be, because we're borrowing their jukebox, their fake car, their shadow screen. We're going to coordinate a Friday handoff of the set pieces that will then come back Saturday morning before our closing day doubleheader. But yeah, we're going to have some Elusive folks at our midnight shows. They're going to lead the Virgin Games. We're going to do the Virgin Pop, where all the folks who haven't seen Rocky get to, if they want to, go on stage for the initiation, and they have the V's, painted on their forehead in lipstick, which even for the non-midnight shows, we love when people show up and participate like that too. But there's a whole ritual that we're not super familiar with, that Elusive is taking the reins and helping us out.
That's great. It's great partner to have.
Yeah, they've got 5 shows actually coming up in October. They've got a chance. So there's a chance to see a Rocky Horror Shadowcast every single weekend in October. They start at the Holiday Theater in Denver. Then they're performing actually in the library in Boulder, which I think is interesting that they're at the Canyon Theater over there. They're going to be at the Ellie Calkins Opera House. They're going to be at the Paramount Theater performing with special guest Patricia Quinn, who is actually from the film version. She played Magenta in the 1975 film. And then they're going to be back in Boulder at the Boulder Theater on Halloween itself. October 31st, if you want to see a Rocky, you can.
And not only was Patricia Quinn Magenta, she also was the red lips in the opening sequence. So if you want to see those magnificent red lips in real life, you got to go.
All right. So I had a section here where, maybe we talk about what Rocky Horror is all about, but I think we might skip over that because I think really pretty much everybody knows what the show is about. But basically it's these two muggles, Brad and Janet, who stumble into, this wild, they're a bunch of aliens, and they're kind of a sex cult or something. And they wind up having their own morals and sexual identity challenged in kind of a fun way. But, what is it about this particular show that has stuck? So, Kevin, do you have any thought about why Rocky has been around for over 5 decades?
Yeah, we were talking as a creative team about the way the show satirizes gay panic and this idea of, queer people seducing otherwise upstanding members of society and turning them into evildoers who give themselves over to sins of the flesh. And the way the narrator serves a role in the show is fascinating to me. During the entire performance, it's very campy. You're seeing Brad and Janet, who are very cookie cutter, becoming seduced by Frank, and by the end they're wearing corsets and feather boas and fishnets. But the narrator is talking about a man of a certain persuasion, referring to Frank, is going to tempt our hero and heroine into evil doing, and it kind of feels like Reefer Madness, if you've ever seen that original film, which is genuinely trying to scare people away from, partaking in the devil's lettuce, marijuana. And Rocky Horror being created by a queer person, Richard O'Brien, and being able to poke fun at that while having that presence of the man, the standard of heteronormative correct behavior, commenting throughout, can you believe what's happening? Whereas the audience is having a blast. Like, I don't see a problem with this. They look awesome. They sound awesome. The music slaps. This is what's wrong with it.
So, can you tell us a little bit about why 2 Cent Lion? This is, I'd say, a little bit of a departure from what you've done before. Why did you decide to program Rocky Horror? I have to say, when you first told me about it, I was like, really?
Our director, Tamara Nelson, she directed the first iteration of Clink Clank, which we did at the University of Denver's Black Box. And this is our second collaboration with her. It's been a dream show for her for a while. And she brought it to us as sort of wouldn't it be fun if we did this? And we were hesitant at first because it's a big swing for us in terms of production value. It's the license alone was a bigger budget than a lot of the shows we'd ever done before. But I think from a business standpoint, we thought it'd be a great opportunity to reach more people as a company and spread our message to people who hadn't heard of us before. Being a queer theater company, to do a show as iconic and as sort of widespread. So many people just hear that Rocky's happening and they're like, oh yeah, I know the songs, I know the story. And also from just our mission, the idea of creating a positive queer representation on stage and having a space where queer artists can tell queer stories. So many members of our cast are genderqueer or non-conforming or identify as queer in some way. And that was what drew them to Rocky in the first place. So having a space where our artists can be in this really supportive community, it's amazing how much they've bonded in the pretty short rehearsal period. It was only 6 weeks of rehearsal before going into a tech, which is a really quick turnaround for a musical. At least for us, that's a big swing for us because we're also all working day jobs, We're just meeting at a church every weeknight. But we think that Tamara really wanted the show and Frank's character especially. He's not just a villain, he's playing the role of the mad scientist villain in sort of the classic monster movie trope, but he's a very interesting character that has a lot more nuance when you actually look at the show itself and what he's doing. And in relation to all the other characters, he's kind of, tricking them, but also opening them up to what they actually want. And Brad and Janet clearly are, they're into what they're getting here at the castle, even though they're being told it's wrong and being told that they need to protect society and reject it. So we thought that 2 Cent Lion being a space for those queer stories and for people who may not be queer to be exposed to queer narratives and queer characters that might open their mind a little bit.
I know, Kevin, from our conversations that you and your family have a really interesting connection to Rocky as well. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship there, as well as kind of the 2 Cent Lion production is not just a replica production of the original movie or original staging, a little bit about what folks can expect from the musical.
Rocky Horror is kind of in my family's DNA. My dad would sneak out in high school to go see the midnight screenings. Also, Sweet Transvestite is his go-to karaoke song, so I'm kind of outing him with that. So, sorry, Dad, the world knows it now. Yeah, my aunt performed in the show in New York. Yeah, it's something that goes really, really deep in my family. We did the time warp at my great-grandma's 90th birthday, and we all did the time warp, and at the end of the time warp, everyone falls to the ground. And, we all were worried my great-grandma was like, oh my gosh, she fell down. And she's just laughing. And it's something that's so intergenerational. And I think that speaks to the timeless nature of the show. I just wanted to say another reason to come see our production of Rocky, we partnered with Family for a lot of our accessibility needs and resources, but especially Midnight Madness, I know a lot of folks are intimidated if they don't know the call and response, cues and quotes, and we're trying to make it as inclusive and accessible as possible. We're actually going to prompt the call and response with projections on screen so that if you don't know what the call outs are during the performance, you can kind of still participate even if you're not familiar with all of the crazy midnight showings with the shadow cast. So we want everyone to experience the magic of the audience immersion and audience interactivity of Rocky. So
cool. Well, so the Rocky Horror Show plays at the People's Building through October 5th. So there's plenty of opportunities to get out there and see it. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll look at this week's Colorado headliners and then my interview with Max Shulman from TheaterWorks in Colorado Springs. OnStage Colorado was brought to you by the Colorado Fine Arts Center at Colorado College. Their season opens with Dial M for Murder, a new version of the celebrated murder mystery that inspired Alfred Hitchcock's movie masterpiece. Running through October 6th, tickets at fac.coloradocollege.edu. We're also sponsored by the Arvada Center, whose new season is now underway with the musical Waitress playing through October 13th, and Dracula, a feminist revenge fantasy, really, opening September 27th and running through November 3rd. Tickets at arvadacenter.org. And support for OnStage Colorado comes from the Boulder Ensemble Theater Company, whose upcoming season kicks off September 26th with Henrik Ibsen's Enemy of the People, adapted by Mark Reagan. The show runs through October 13th at the Denver Savoy and November 8th through 17th at the Dairy Center in Boulder. Tickets at betc.org. And we also receive support from the Newman Center at the University of Denver, whose Newman Center Presents season starts soon and includes Martha Redbone's show Bone Hill on September 25th. The production is a song cycle inspired by Redbone's life and the women she descended from. Tickets at newmancenterpresents.com. All right, we're back and ready to let loose with this week's Colorado headliners. So these are some of the upcoming shows around the Centennial State that we're looking forward to in no particular order. So, Kevin, I think, did you have, since you're our guest, are there any headliner picks you wanted to share?
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to The Girl on the Train, which is playing at Firehouse Theater. I worked with Firehouse a few years ago on Three Tall Women. They're just great people over there. It's a really awesome community theater based in Lowry. I believe it's Colorado Free College. And they have a really cute small theater. I have a friend performing in Girl on the Train. That opens October 5th. So that's a couple weeks away, but the director, Julie K. Wolf, is fabulous. And that's sure to be a really cool show.
All right. And it runs through November 3rd. What about you, Tony?
Yeah, my first headliner pick is, I guess, kind of keeping with Kevin. Kevin picked a kind of thriller, spooky pick. A lot of my picks are kind of themed around that since we're getting into spooky season. It is Dracula, a feminist revenge fantasy, really, at the Arvada Center. This play is by friend of the podcast, Kate Hamill, who has kind of flipped Dracula on its head and kind of rewritten the narrative so that the female characters have a little bit more agency. It's not your traditional Dracula with coffins, fangs. There's no sparkly vampires, although there are jokes about it. So it's a lot of humor. It's basically, the team described it to me as Buffy meets Interview with a Vampire meets classic monster movies, but with a lot of heart. So looking forward to seeing it. It's going to be a lot of blood there at the Arvada Center. Previews for this production start September 25th and 6th, and then the show itself runs September 27th through November 3rd.
Yep, looking forward to that one for sure. Going all the way down south to Durango, the Merely Players are doing the Book of Will, September 27th through October 6th. I think there was another production that's not too long ago that we were talking about, but wanted to give a shout out to our friends down south. So this is a book about a couple of actors who are determined to compile Shakespeare's first folio and preserve the words that shaped their lives. So that's the Book of Will in Durango.
My next headlining pick is at the Denver Center It is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. So this is an adaptation of Erica Sanchez's novel, and it follows Julia, who is a Chicago high schooler who is definitely not a perfect daughter, as she describes herself. That's her older sister. But when her sister dies in a tragic accident, she kind of has to meet the moment and rise to the occasion. So looking forward to checking out this adaptation. Apparently, I've heard from the Denver Center that the writer has done a lot of reworks for this particular production. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. So previews for this show begin September 27th through October 3rd, and the show itself runs October 4th through November 3rd.
All right, my next headliner is What the Constitution Means to Me. So this is up at Thunder River in Carbondale and runs September 12th through the 29th. So it's up now. So you've got one more weekend to check it out. So this is, Heidi Schreck's play about, exactly what the title says. It's a woman describing, her family's relation to the Constitution and kind of parallels or talking about how it applies today. So up in Carbondale, if you're up there, we're looking at leaves.
Yeah, that is such a popular show. It's being done everywhere.
Yeah.
My next headlining pick is in Boulder. So it's by a local theater company. It's their season opening world premiere, Stockade, written by Henry Award-winning playwright Andrew Rosendorf with Carolyn Aquilin, and it's directed by the Henry Award-winning director, Christy Montour Larson. So this play is set 5 years after the end of World War II and follows a group of gay soldiers who gather for a reunion of sorts on Fire Island. I saw this play in its early developmental stages at Local Lab this year. It was a really interesting piece in that setting, very, very heavy on the history. And so I'm curious to see what revisions are being done for it. I hear that Andrew and Carolyn have really been hard at work. They've taken the feedback that they learned from the Local Lab session and the audience feedback that they got there, and have really been applying it. So looking forward to seeing what that looks like in its final form when it opens September 28th at the Dairy Arts Center and runs through October 3rd.
I'll give a shout out just to the folks at Local. I used to do marketing for them, and they're lovely people over there. Nick Chase, Betty Hart, Pesha Rudnick, really great people to support. So see that play, support new plays, because they're doing some of the best new play development in Colorado.
Yep. All right, my next headliner is, I think, a theater we haven't mentioned before, the CSU theater department. We don't often cover, university theater so much, but they reached out to me to get this in our calendar, and the show is called Everybody. It runs September 27th through October 6th, and it's a modern retelling of the 15th century morality tale, The Summoning of Every Man. And it's Professor Javier Hurtado's directorial debut at CSU. So if you're up in Fort Collins, that one might be, sounds pretty interesting. So you might want to check that one out.
That does sound really cool, yeah. And I'm going to give you another reason to go up to Fort Fun with my next pick, October Surprise by OnStage Production. So this is a world premiere play by Miguel Munoz, and it's set in a high-stakes Texas Senate race. There's a political crisis at the border and sibling rivalry as Maria, who is a strong-willed immigration lawyer and activist, is running against her brother, Antonio, the new charismatic face of conservatism. When Maria uncovers a secret that could decimate her brother's campaign, she has to decide if family ties mean more than her ideals. So I think this is a really perfectly timed play for the election, and it sounds like a really cool, funny piece. So this is going to be in Fort Collins at OnStage from September 28th through October 12th.
Great. All right, my last headliner is a one-off, Stealing Starlight from Cypherbird Projects. It'll be at Trident Books in Boulder on September 29th. So it's a reading. It says it's an evening of whimsy and magic, a stage reading by Lisa Wagner Erickson, the playwright, a fractured fairy tale about gnomes, magic, and an obsession with shiny plastic. So that's on September 29th at the Trident Bookstore in Boulder.
Cool. My final headliner is an immersive burlesque experience that pays homage to your favorite shows from the public broadcast service. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, at the Bug Theater in Denver, September 28th. And it's this is back after 5 years. It was originally done. And it is a naughty childhood puppets, raunchy story readings from Reading Rainbow, and the creators promise that this burlesque experience will ruin your childhood in the most delightful way possible. So prepare to strap in. It's set actually in the taping of the public broadcasting service show, so you're kind of involved in the experience. I got to chat with the person who's running the show last week, and it just sounds like it's going to be an absolute blast.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, well, that is our headliners for the week. Also, new and upcoming reviews on the website include Hamlet, Rocky Horror, Dial M for Murder, The Pillow Man, School for Lies, God of Carnage, Henry the Fourth and Fifth. Lots of shows going on right now. We're trying like mad to cover as many as we can. So.
We got lots of great reviews for folks to check out at OnStageColorado.com. Now, get comfortable and settle in for Alex's interview with Professor Max Shulman.
All right, we are here with Professor Max Shulman from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs Theater Department. Welcome to the podcast, Max. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, so you have a really exciting project coming up. It's Shakespeare's Henry. This is a TheaterWorks production at UCCS at the Ent Center. And this is a mashup of 3 of Shakespeare's histories. So Henry the Fourth, parts 1 and 2, and Henry the Fifth. So, wow, that's a big project to take on.
Yeah, it's been really exciting, and it's been a long process, and working on the adaptation has been a wonderful challenge as we try to put these stories together in a way that is accessible to audiences and that tells a story that I think lives inside those texts. And if you want to be really technical, we even have a moment from Richard II in the script as well.
Oh, wow.
If 3 plays weren't enough, but primarily you're seeing the Henrys. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you did the adaptation, did you keep everything pretty much in the same order and just remove things, or did you move any scenes around?
A little bit of everything. I was helped out, especially in the fours, by Shakespeare himself, who creates a kind of structure that really does kind of ping pong almost every other scene between the world of the court and then the world of Eastcheap. So he creates a structure that moves between the comic and the more dramatic. And so we had to embrace, it was really easy to embrace that structure, but there's a lot that's taken out. It's something like 9 hours of stage time that's turned into something like 2.5. So a lot found its way on the cutting floor. And then Henry V offers a distinct tonal shift that was fun to embrace as well. That the hope is that we don't let the audience ever get too lulled into a rhythm. But then when we arrive at Al as king, which is primarily the action of Henry V, the play takes on a new energy and feeling. But it always carries with it the echoes of those earlier plays. And I think what was really important is figuring out exactly the story that we wanted to tell. There's so many different ways of approaching even the individual plays, but certainly the through line of these plays. And you can see throughout history, people have done it in different ways. If you want a great example is if you want to watch a Henry ad that's all about Falstaff, you can watch Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight. But he really completely centers that character and puts the court kind of askew in the periphery. And so figuring out what story we wanted to tell, or really kind of embracing the story I was attracted to in that TheaterWorks, and the artistic director, Caitlin Lowens, was attracted to in the moment, was kind of key. And then also embracing, there was an ease in the idea that, unlike some of the other parts of what we think of the Henriad, which includes Richard II, which includes Richard III, which includes Henry VI, Part 1, 2, and 3, he actually wrote these plays in order. And they do tell a kind of related story. They seem to be offering an audience one story that leads to another, that directly leads to another. And so that actually served our turn when it came to the...
Okay. Now, do you know, has this been done before where these three have been combined?
Yes, they have. And different versions of cuttings of the Henriad have been done throughout time. Very often Henry IV Part 1 and 2 are cut together. Henry VI's are cut together. Years ago, I worked on a production of what was called H6R3 that went from Henry VI to Richard III. I do think the inclusion of Henry V is a little unusual. I think reaching out from those H4 stories, which is really the story of Hal becoming king and ends with his inauguration, with him taking the throne. So to think about the lessons that Hal learned earlier, how those then feed into his early years as king and his efforts as king, that may be a little unusual, but also I think part of the excitement.
So Henry IV, 1 and 2, I'm not familiar with that story. So obviously this is Hal's father, and there's wars and also, right. And so how much of Hal is in the Henry IV stories?
He really is the central character, and he becomes this sort of central figure caught between a number of other pretty famous characters. He has two fathers, sort of. One of them is Henry IV, his actual father, and the other is Falstaff, the famous rotund knight who is full of life,
right?
And is kind of the Socrates of Eastcheap and has his own kingdom amongst the rogues of London. Hal gets caught between them. He gets caught in some ways between himself and this other wonderful character known as Hotspur, and has to maneuver his way through these two fathers, maneuver his way through this other figure who is kind of his mirror. Hotspur is sort of another version of Hal, and he's the more celebrated version, doing the things that Hal should be doing instead of Hal is wasting his time away as the profligate son with Falstaff. And it's really extraordinary to think about, because you have in the first Henry IV Part 1, you have three characters named Henry.
Right.
It's like if Shakespeare showed up to like a 101 playwriting class, they'd be like, you can't, what are you doing?
It's such a good name.
We have Henry IV, who is actually king. We have Henry, his son, who is also known as Harry, who is also known as Hal. And then we have Harry Percy, who is also known as Hotspur. And all of these people exist in this world. And so we really, those first two plays are very much, especially the first one, which is where we spend most of our time in this version, Henry IV Part 1, following Hal as he maneuvers through these people that are affecting his life.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this play as it sits in 2024. Sometimes I have to say a lot of people think that Shakespeare's histories are kind of a slog to sit through and maybe boring. But a lot of people seen Henry V, the movie with Kenneth Branagh, which was a great adaptation, I thought.
Yeah.
So what about of course we've got the leadership is something that's on all our minds these days, and the story certainly talks a lot about that. How would you find audiences today relating to this?
Yeah, I mean, the original impulse from TheaterWorks when they approached me about the project directly had to do with where we sit right now, with an election coming up and wanting to create something that talked about leadership. And these plays explore that. All of the histories do, and indeed, anytime there's a major shakeup in the country, these histories become popular. You start seeing them pop up on stage.
Right.
There's a kind of rhythm of that. And the plays, especially Henry IV to Henry V, but all these history plays really do engage in those questions of what does it take to be a leader? What is the experience of being a leader? What are the limits of leadership? What are the responsibilities of leadership? I think these plays, especially because we spend this time both in the court and out of the court, these plays really engage in this question of how does a society actually produce its leaders, right? I know we think of Henry V as this kind of shining, heroic king, but I think these plays really do engage in him as a product of the world he lives in. And so I'm excited about letting audiences reflect upon what kind of leaders do we produce? Because leaders don't come out of nowhere. They're not anomalies, right? They're the product of their society. And Hal is the product of court. He is the product of the rogues of Eastcheap. He is the product of his youth. He is the product of the world that he lives in. And so we get to see how the lessons that world teach him affect what kind of leader he becomes. And so I think we get to think about what does leadership mean? And then we also get to think about what kind of leaders are we producing? And then, Shakespeare's great skill is that he humanizes all of his characters and asks questions about them, but never gives us answers. And that's why we do the plays over and over and over again. And so we also get to engage on an incredibly humanistic level the questions of how well we can really know a person and how we can have empathy for that person and how we can, and fathers and sons. And so we get to think about our leaders as human beings and get to think about the choices they make as focused not just about questions of nation, but also questions of day-to-day interaction and what it means to be a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing about leadership I always find interesting is that often it's not taught per se. It's not like, especially a lot of these, old kings and stuff. It's not like they went to king school or something
Right.
before they became kings.
That's right.
And so I think what Shakespeare is trying to do is really show in great detail how a leader is made, and more by observing so much than being instructed and being taught by circumstance, which is I think what makes these histories so fascinating. So and there's also quite a bit about change. So Hal goes from kind of like you said, the profligate son, this kind of the screw up young man who's hanging out partying or whatever, and then realize his father gets sick, and so how much of that is part of the story as well?
I love that you brought that up. Because and I can sort of say, I can walk into the room as a director with actors and talk about politics and nation, but you can't really play those things. Those aren't really what make the engine of a play run, right? You have to find the thing that actors can engage with on a human level and an emotional level, and change is that theme. So I love that you see that here, because that to me is what's at the heart of this play. If you strip away the politics, which I think are key, but if you strip them away, what you get is a play about what it means to grow and change, and that what I think experience that many of us can appreciate of. Sometimes you make a promise or you make a vow or you make a decision, and then all of a sudden you have to back it up and your actions have to alter in order to do so. Or you find yourself in a moment where you go, well, who is this person now? Why am I responding this way? Or where did that person go? I think many of us have that experience. We can look back into our past and wonder, who was the young man, heading out of college, or who was the person with those ideals, and where do I sit today? And so much of this play does let us track in detail, really bit by bit, how Hal develops as a person. And so in in my mind, that's the emotional center and the experiential center of the play. How do certain events and how do experiences turn us into who we are? And we get to see a very different Hal from the moment we meet him to the moment that he fights his war in Agincourt.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to ask about some of those key things. So, sometimes people just know a line from a certain play, and so, the famous line from Henry IV, I think it's in part 2, is "Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown." Whose line is that? I don't even know.
That's Henry IV. Henry IV is like a lot of these, and these kind of speeches run throughout all of these histories. He's taking a moment to speak with the audience about how lonely and troubling it is to be a leader, and the things that weigh upon him. He's a different character than, say, a Richard II or his son Hal, but that's where that comes from. We get and Hal even has kind of echoes of that in his own speeches when he becomes king. And in fact, you get to see, I mean, these are just in the play, and all I've tried to do is try to draw our attention to them. But throughout the whole set of histories, you see these echoes of speeches where people are talking about, Richard II says things like, "I, like you, eat bread," right? There's this real obsession of, I'm just a person. And yet I have this responsibility. Henry IV says this wonderful line, "You said, heavy the head that wears the crown." And then Henry V, his son, will later on say, "Upon the king, let it all lie upon the king." And so they each react a little differently, but they carry these themes of what it means to be a leader. Yeah, that's one of the famous lines. There are some by Falstaff has some great ones where he talks about discretion is the better part of valor, right? To be valorous is really to have discretion. And then Henry V, it's chock full of them.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because when you think about, I think, it really alludes to the fact that, pursuing power and actually getting that position may not be all it's cracked up to be, which is the heavy, where's the headline. And, I think when we think about our time, I think there's one person who, not to get political or too political, but, I don't think Donald Trump understands leadership at all. And, it's really just the pursuit of power and then not knowing what to do with it at all, which is really, I don't know, I kind of find it fascinating. I think I'm always fascinated by the pursuit of power and the reluctance to relinquish it, like these senators that are 1,000 years old and they just don't want to go away, what would you say about, do these plays say a lot about power as well?
I think they do, and they say a lot about power and about what it means to make a decision as a leader and then have to follow it through. There's it's one of my favorite scenes in the play in Henry V, and it's in our production, where Henry goes undercover and he finds 3 men sitting by a campfire who are just his soldiers on the eve of battle.
Great scene.
And it's a great scene. And he sort of expresses his philosophy, that has to do with him trying to kind of expunge himself of responsibility for some of the choices he's made, right? He tries to kind of argue that, well, my soldiers' souls are their own. I'm not responsible for them. And I think he is shocked. And I think it is such an amazing and shocking moment where they fire right back at him and say, no, it's entirely his fault. He's making these choices and it's his call and they have to be good choices. And if they're not, then this is his fault. And he's left with the weight of that. So many of the characters are carefully considering what it means to try to seize power. Even someone like, so we have scenes with Hotspur, where Hotspur is often played as kind of this endlessly driven, fiery guy. And he is that. But then Shakespeare gives us this wonderful scene with his wife where she almost stops him and says, what are you really doing? Why are you doing this? And he has to even grapple with, am I about to become a rebel because I'm trying to seize power or because I think I owe someone something? And so Shakespeare, much more than it feels like some of our political candidates at the moment, really forces his characters to engage with as many angles as we can find around what it means to want power. And he builds, it's really amazing, right? He builds off instability, right? And we get to follow in the Henrietta. If we go all the way to Richard III, you really get to see how we can move from sort of an unstable world where we're not sure who's supposed to be king to a world at war where we seek leaders to a world that starts to fall apart. And that the weakness of that, this is not in our play because we're getting to Richard III, when things start to fall apart, when reality starts to fall apart, and this is what happens in Henry VI plays, we get a tyrant, right? We get Richard III. And that's really where I think Shakespeare starts asking these questions about how does tyranny occur? Mm-hmm. He hints at it in Henry V, because I think Henry V, you mentioned Branagh, and I love that version of that play, but I think a lot of us have an image in our head of Henry V, of the Henry V play is really just about a kind of shining golden king who can do no wrong, who rises, who fights the battle, who wins. And I actually think the play is far more complicated and ambiguous than that. It forces Hal to struggle with why he's waging this war and what it means to lose and what his responsibility is. And
exactly, yeah, it's like, it may be all fine and dandy when they quote unquote win, but half the guys are dead. And what was this war about anyway? So
that's right.
Why are we in France again?
Right. Yeah.
So, one of the big famous scenes that you alluded to earlier is the Battle of Agincourt. And of course, Hal has the big speech, the Band of Brothers speech. And I wanted to ask about, how is that something that you kind of made it as like a big set piece, or how do you handle that? And how is the play staged? Is it kind of minimal, or is it a full on production with ramparts and horses and all that?
We don't have a horse budget, unfortunately. That's a shame. Yeah. So the stage, it's staged in an alley. So we have audience on two sides looking at each other across a very big alley stage. We wanted to create something that we could have, or that we could tell an epic tale on, that we could travel and go through time on. We're using, if you've ever been to the Dusty Lou Bon Vivant, which is TheaterWorks' home theater in the End Center, we're using every inch of that space, including the balconies, for a number of scenes. So it's a pretty kind of frenetic, fast-moving physical production. It's set in kind of loosely modernized 14th century. So don't think of, it's not Shakespearean Elizabethan clothes with puffy shirts or pumpkin pants. But something kind of sleeker that nods back to a medieval, a sort of medieval look. We have a lot of people changing characters very quickly. So the hope with this production is that the interactions between the people on stage are genuine and human and poetic and beautiful, and then the storytelling is theatrical and adventurous. It's not a work of realism in that way. We are leaping over time, jumping from character to character, having one scene kind of bulldoze into another, thinking of this story as a fast-moving train that is carrying us along as we drive towards Hal's development and eventual crowning. Thinking about the Band of Brothers speech, it's not necessarily thinking of it as a set piece, although I think we've created a beautiful moment there. And Colton Pratt, who plays Hal and then Henry V, after he's crowned, is doing a really wonderful and very exciting job of allowing us to explore all the different angles of Hal and his complexity. And what's so lovely about that speech is that it actually comes between these intense moments of turmoil. And so for this moment, Hal has, it's in some ways that's the moment where Hal becomes the king he wants to be. He does rise to the occasion. And your sort of question about power and leadership later, in this moment, I think Shakespeare gives us kind of a wonderful picture of what leadership can be. And so the goal is to capture that excitement and to watch Hal have to rise to the occasion. We want great leaders. We want to be inspired by what a leader can be. And I think that moment, one of the reasons we love it so much is it's not just hoorah, but it's about somebody rising truly to the occasion. And that's so exciting. And the language is so tremendous.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful speech. It really is.
Yeah. I'm jealous of him. When he gets to say it on stage, I kind of get up and cheer or get up and say the words with him, because why wouldn't you? It's so ingrained in our minds.
One last thing before we wind up, I want to ask you mentioned a lot of sword fighting. Who's the fight choreographer, and how do you work with that person?
Sam Egley is the fight choreographer. Samantha, she's Denver based, and I cannot sing her praises loud enough. So directors who are listening to this, go find the humble warrior. Go find Sam, Egle. She's tremendous. And she is both our fight and intimacy coordinator. So she's doing both, choreographing these giant fights, and then she's also helping to choreograph moments of intimacy. When you have someone as skilled as Sam, it becomes this really, truly wonderful collaboration where she is so in tune with how a body moves and what the options are that I can go to her and say, well, there's a fight here and it should be really well matched, but we want one guy to fight more aggressively and the other guy, and we can base those fights on personality. Every fight tells a story. Or I can say, I need this fight to be comic, and she knows how to make that look funny. She knows what to do to bring jokes into it. Mm-hmm. She's always going to ask, any good fight choreographer is going to ask questions about, what story are we telling? Why are they fighting? Why are they here? Where did they come from? So almost anything, it's the same kind of questions you would ask when you're playing a role in a scene, right? And then Sam makes offers. She builds a piece and we look at it together, and I might make an offer and say, well, could this be more violent, or that's going too far, or could that be more dangerous? And there's also just logistical things like I need them to be on the other side of the stage by the end of it.
Right.
And she has a wonderful sense of detail. There are certain moments where, I'm trying to think about the play as a whole, and Sam, especially in the moments where she's working, is really is able to come in with a great sense of kind of what the possibilities are and how to make those details tell a story. So working with a fight choreographer is amazing. And she spent a lot of time with our cast. We have these giant wars where she and her assistant have built, she sort of builds little pieces bit by bit and then runs them and then runs them and then runs them. So it's almost like it's like doing a dance, bit by bit.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And also that she's doing the intimacy work as well. It's like love and war.
Love and war, yeah.
Two sides of the same coin.
That's right. And that's more and more typical. You're seeing that a lot more often, that flight choreographers are getting that training. And because in some ways, they are approached similarly, right? Like you're going to approach the actors and say, what are you capable of doing? Because I'm not going to ask you to do a backflip if you can't do a backflip.
Right.
Right. And the same thing with intimacy. What are you comfortable with doing, right? Because, what are you open to? And then how can we tell that story? The same thing. How do these people really feel about each other? How well do they know each other and each other's bodies? What is the feeling of this moment? Because a kiss is never just a kiss.
All right. Well, this was great, Max. This is Shakespeare's Henry from TheaterWorks. Will be at the University of Colorado Colorado Springs Ent Center for the Performing Arts, September 19th through October 13th. And I think it's going to be a banger. If you're up here in the Denver area, you should probably trek down to Colorado Springs to check this out and get your fill of Hank and Hal. So thanks a lot for your time, Max. I appreciate it. And break legs out there with opening this.
My pleasure. It's been great to talk.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of the OnStage Colorado podcast. Thank you so much for Max for coming on to the OnStage Colorado podcast. And now I finally understand how TheaterWorks works. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Really informative. So thanks for making the time to come on the OnStage Colorado podcast.
Yeah. So next week on the podcast, we'll have your interview with Aisha Ahmed Post, the executive director of the Newman Center. What can you tell us about that conversation, Alex?
So I was curious to talk to her because the Newman Center has a really different kind of lineup than just about any other performing arts facility in the state. They have a lot of world music and different. And I just wanted to ask her about how they come up with that stuff, who their audience is, and the types of acts that they're looking for. So it was really interesting. And one of the things she told me is that the faculty and student body of CU makes up a relatively small portion of their audience. It's really a lot of people from around the metro area.
Be sure to subscribe to the OnStage Colorado podcast wherever you get your audio stuff so you don't miss a second. And if you like what you're doing, be sure to let the other theater lovers in your life know about us so that we can add more followers to our OnStage Colorado theater cult.
Okay. Yep. Join us. So be sure to check out all the reviews, news, and other podcast episodes and our full statewide theater calendar on the website at onstagecolorado.com. And thanks for tuning into the podcast. Well, it was great chatting with you today, Kevin. I'm Alex Miller.
I'm Kevin Douglas.
And I'm Toni Tresca. And we'll see you at the show.